Welcome to the Week 3 lecture on the short stories in the anthology. We're going to talk about an important component of fiction, character. My goal is to give you a framework within which to evaluate the short stories in Chapter 8. An understanding of these terms will help you analyze the texts we're reading, and that is what literature courses are all about, analyzing and responding to the text. Characterization is the process by which an author reveals a character's personality to the reader. There are two types of characterization, direct and indirect. Direct characterization is when the reader is told what the character's personality is. Indirect characterization is when the reader is shown things, for example, how the character looks, the person's thoughts, speech, actions, effect on others, that reveal the character's personality. In this slide, we have an example of indirect characterization. In John Updike's famous short story, A&P, this is the name of a grocery market chain in the eastern part of the U.S., the reader is told that the young woman who strolls into the grocery store has a regal appearance. She didn't look around, not this queen. She just walked straight on slowly on these long white prima donna legs. Later, the reader is told what she appears to be thinking. She's getting sore now that she remembers her place, a place from which the crowd that runs the A&P must look pretty crummy. After all, she is the person who is buying herring, and remember that's an expensive snack that is used when entertaining people. Probably puts her a little bit out of reach of the folks who were working at the A&P. Similarly, at the end of the story, we're told that Sammy feels pretty crummy. There's a definite component of despair. But Updike doesn't exactly tell us what to think about the character. It's up to us to figure out what kind of person he is. In this slide, we have an example of direct characterization from the wonderful short story Griffin. In this story, the student's teacher gets sick, and they get this bizarre substitute teacher. One student is described as a bad person. Okay, we know exactly what we're supposed to think about Carol. And then in the next quote, the reader is told that Bobby Krzyzanowicz wishes the teacher well. I hope you feel better tomorrow, Mr. Hibbler, Bobby Krzyzanowicz, the faultless brown-noser, said, and I hear Carol Peterson's evil giggle. So we know that Bobby is faultless, he makes no mistakes, he's a brown-noser, always kissing up to the teacher, and once again we're reminded that Carol is a bad person. So there are different types of characters. Round characters are like real people. They have different personality traits, and sometimes these traits are contradictory. The beauty of round characters is that they seem like real people, because obviously people contain both good and bad characteristics. Flat characters, on the other hand, are less developed. They may be like stereotypes or stock characters. So a stock character is a personality type that's easy for the reader to identify. For example, we know that Darth Vader is a villain, that Superman is the big strong guy who will save the damsel in distress, and that Gaston from Beauty and the Beast is a braggart. These characters are not multidimensional. Sometimes their features are so exaggerated that they become sort of absurd. At this point, they become caricatures. I was listening to an interview recently of the man who came up with the TV show The Simpsons. He was saying that one of the challenges for the writers on the show is to not make Homer 100% stupid or selfish. This is the same idea. They realized that if he were just bad, he wouldn't be credible or believable. Okay, two more terms about characters that you need to be familiar with. Dynamic and static characters. Dynamic characters evolve. Static ones don't change. If you're familiar with the novel Pride and Prejudice or with the film, both Lizzie and Darcy evolve by the end of the novel. They've been transformed by love. They're less quick to judge. On the other hand, the other characters remain exactly the same. Mrs. Bennet, for example, is as narrow-minded and hypocritical as she was in the beginning of the novel. A critical factor that's important in a character is his or her motivation. Why a character behaves the way he or she does, in other words, what motivates that character, is key to whether the story is successful. Ineffective writers have characters who behave in ways that the reader might not understand. Good writers, on the other hand, portray characters whose actions are believable or plausible. Even if we don't agree with the character's actions, we understand them. Here's a question for you. Can you account for Miss Brill's tears at the end of the short story by Catherine Mansfield? Miss Brill is sort of a tragic figure. She's so lonely. She happily puts on her fur wrap, this was the fashion then, and goes out to the park. At the end of the story, something happens that really upsets her. So as you read the story, I'm hoping that you will make note of the clues that the reader is given that really make you understand why this episode is so upsetting to her. Likewise, can you account for the despair felt by Shan Yi at the end of Hangshu 1925? If you read this story closely, you'll be surprised by what is suggested at the end of the story. But when you think about it, the author prepares the reader for this outcome. There are just enough details in the story to make us realize that Shan Yi really has no choice, and the ones we really feel sorry for are the daughters. If these stories have one thing in common, it's that the authors have the skills necessary to make the reader sympathize with and empathize with the characters. And this is what sets literature apart from other works of fiction.